IDW Sonic, issue 55. Kit tells Surge that he made everything in that base get routed to her. Realistically, there's a blackout and the base goes on emergency power. Surge says Sonic won't leave them alone. I like that Kit would rather hide than get back at them. There's a text box saying that the readings aren't great, but the trail leads here. Tails sees a base and can tell by the most obvious insignia ever that it was taken over by Starline. Why would Starline do that when the fact that I took over the base is supposed to be a secret? I'd never assume he'd do that and beg Eggman to attack it the second this would be reported on. Like by a flying badnik. They go there with no sign of Sonic's leg still being bandaged, so of course the writer forgot he was injured. At least explained that he heals fast. He did say he heals fast, but it's not that fast. Then Sonic gets attacked by Metal Sonic, and Eggman gets mad at Metal Sonic because he didn't say he could run off, even though he's just doing what he programmed him for and he wants Sonic defeated. As usual, he's a control freak wasting my time, and Sonic and Metal bounce all around the walls of the base for no apparent reason. Tails apologizes for being late and gets grabbed, and as Sonic keeps looking stupid reasoning with someone who has no free will, we see a text box saying moments earlier, because for some reason the story wants to be more confusing rather than being in chronological order. Eggman wants to find a shortcut and then finds out that Starline modified the floor plan. It's a good thing it's explained that he was smart enough to track down the location of the dynamo cage, because that justifies why he bound this base when he didn't before. He wonders how it's right on top of him, and then Surge threatens him. It's all the more annoying that she talks as if she plans on killing her opponents when she isn't going to and is holding back. If she wasn't holding back, she'd have electrocuted him to death in an instant. He grabs her hair and throws her at the robots, and she uses wisp powers to protect herself. He fires missiles for her to dodge, and eventually, she fires a laser to throw him onto the floor. She steals a capsule with what looks like a green emerald shard in it. Eggman insists that Starline couldn't possibly know about his private access codes for some reason, and he thinks he's got an escape hatch to catch. Sure, it's lucky for him that Surge is somehow just standing there and letting him talk, when the only reason she would keep him alive is that she'd want to punch him a whole bunch. Starline has a pre-recorded message that somehow looks on the bright side about the idea of Eggman finding the space, which I would expect to be a worst-case scenario that he would dread. And says his cheat codes weren't hidden well. It's smart of him to actually anticipate that Eggman might find the space for some reason and prepare for it. Metal Sonic hears someone saying the word fiend and ends up running off. Eggman tells Surge that he could employ her, as she's somehow not hitting him in all of this time. It's just so patronizing how she stands still as a statue in front of him for no reason. It just feels like there's an invisible writer puppeting her strings and holding her back to keep her from killing him. Sonic attacks her, and she jumps up to the ceiling and thinks that no matter how strong she gets, they'll find another way to hurt her. And she thinks her us like she cares about Kit. She falls in front of Kit, and I start to wonder why I wasn't with her supporting her the whole time. Kit justifies that I couldn't find her on the cameras. Kit says he locked down the other routes in the base and they have nowhere to go. Sure, it's convenient that apparently they can lock down a route in a base. For no reason. Sonic makes a clear empty threat to Eggman. Why does he even bother? Sonic and Eggman bore me, wasting my time as I already know that Surge took Eggman's device. How is this issue so long? All Sonic would have to do is run all over the base and he'd find Surge in seconds. Tails says that fighting Metal and Surge together is a major risk, as I wonder why Metal isn't spending all of this time trying to attack Sonic. Eggman never told him to stop fighting with him. I have to assume he did so off screen. Well, I don't think I've ever seen Eggman drinking out of a water bottle before. Sonic whispers that he's gonna smash Eggman's new toy. Sonic says he'll handle Surge if Metal Sonic doesn't start a fight. Eventually, Tails looks at a map on a tablet that conveniently tells him that there's only one route to go to. So, how did he get a map of the place? I guess he hacked. Maybe it's based on echolocation. They go to a place with green tubes, and see pieces of paper, causing Tails to figure out that Starline wanted to make Kit and Surge based on them. How is this the first time he's figured this out when it was obvious from the start? Duh. Sonic says he made them. Duh. Surge told you that right away. Eggman says he had used neural conditioning. Is that his way of saying the Hypno Glove? Or does he mean changing their brain directly with the metal virus? Which would be a lot faster than spending an hour using the hypnotic glove. Eggman's impressed. How does he even know about all the technology used on Surge anyways, when all he's doing is looking at green tubes? Which wouldn't tell you anything. Why are there more than 2 tubes anyways? I don't even know why he would need someone to be in a tube for the metal virus with the cybernetics to work on them. Wouldn't you just have to inject them with it? Tails says that all Starline wanted was to be recognized. And if Eggman had told him that he was a genius earlier, supposedly none of this would have happened. Why would he say this? It's obvious it would have happened anyways if Eggman still fired him, because firing him is obviously why he did this. Not to get his approval, because approval means nothing if he won't follow his advice. But it's surprisingly sweet of Tails to sympathize with him. But Tails should know that he had to fire him because he said he wouldn't let him use his warp topaz when he needed it to save the world. It wouldn't matter how well he treated Starline. He would have done this plan anyways if he still ended up fired because he did to get back with Eggman. Him treating Starline really well would have made getting fired a lot harder to deal with. And he'd have assumed he lost his respect completely anyways because he fired him. So he would have done this to get his acknowledgement regardless. Also, how did Eggman know that he used neural conditioning anyways? For all he knows, they were always like that. Eggman says he'd have never told Starline that he's smart. Why though? Didn't he basically tell him he was smart when he acknowledged how useful he was when he first met him? Because he gave him all the emeralds? I'm pretty sure he acknowledged how smart Wily was in Archie. So why would the more evil Eggman do that for Wily right away, and he wouldn't do that for him? What, because Starline's shorter than him and not human? Sonic goes over to Surge and says that he doesn't want to fight them, and just wants them to hand over the doohickey. It's good that he says this so Kit could realize, albeit later on when reflecting on this, that he's clearly not a bad guy. Too bad the story ends there with of course a fight starting. It sure is a shame that the fight didn't happen in this issue like anyone would expect because it wasted so much time. I always expected the pacing of this comic to be much faster than it is. It makes sense that Sonic and Metal Sonic would fight, but Sonic runs around ignoring Surge. Once the two of them have just run all through the base and found Surge. This would only make sense if Metal Sonic was a little bit faster than Sonic. IDW Sonic, issue 56. So the fight starts, although all that's happening is the fast people are moving all over the place. Tails has Kit in front of him and says he doesn't want to fight him and is only protecting Sonic. I like that Kit's quiet after this, implying that it was a good idea to tell him that because he finds it relatable. He also tried to protect Sonic and Surge reminds him of him, so that is relatable to him. Surge complains about being ganged up on, and out of nowhere she tries to go after Eggman instead of Sonic. It'd be smart because he's the weakest target. Metal goes after her, and she knew he'd do that, and punches back at him and swings him around. I like that because I never saw that before. Finally, Metal Sonic remembers he could just use the black shield, and her red bracelet gets caught in its wall, but she electrocutes the robot. And the next page is basically unreadable, with nothing but a boom sound effect. Eggman warns him to get out of the water, and I'm glad he lampshades that he's being an idiot, and Sonic gets out of there before she could electrocute it. Yeah, but the fact remains, if she really wanted to electrocute him to death, she would have done it much earlier. So she's clearly been deliberately avoiding that, because then she wouldn't get to hit him anymore. I bet the only reason she electrocuted the water was because Eggman warned him to leave it. Because otherwise, what took so long? Eggman expects me to believe he could fix Metal Sonic where he is, with no apparent tools or materials around and with barely any time. It doesn't look like he has any pockets. Every time Sonic tries to talk to Surge, it's the same thing and it just makes him look like an idiot. Tails tells Kit he's sorry and he read through all of Starline's notes, and tells him the obvious that it doesn't justify this and Surge is just hurting herself. He says he thinks Kit knows this isn't okay. There seems to be a miracle because Kit disarms his water tails after that, even though he'd know that Surge wants him to kill him. Tails thanks him, and he lets him put his hand on his shoulder. I'm a bit hesitant to believe it could be this easy after he was completely irrational a few issues ago. Tails reassures him that Sonic will fix this, but he doesn't tell him that Starline restored someone's memories from amnesia once, so he doesn't give him any reason to have faith in Sonic. I guess Sonic doesn't know where the machine is anyways. Sonic runs along the wall like in Lost World, and uses a shiny thing to reflect a wisp laser. And he jumps on cubes, wasting my time some more, saying that she has no reason to keep fighting him because Starline's not here. And there's really no point in drawing her to look sad, since after that she makes him fall into the water and tries to shock him. But since he always survives, it's just a pointless thing to write for the shock value, where I have to assume she didn't use nearly enough voltage. Good thing rings exist, or this would be stupid. Surge says she was built to live in his shadow, and there's no freedom for her while he's still alive. Then the invention on her head cracks, and she passes out. And she was face first in the water, but after Sonic gets out of it, she's suddenly not face first in it anymore. So did she do that, or did he do that? Or a wisp? Then Metal Sonic gets splashed with water from Kit, who fortunately doesn't have his eyes look terrible in this panel. I like that Eggman insults Kit, giving him all the more reason to hate him. He puts water tentacles around Eggman and Metal, and Sonic thanks him. But the writer only cares about causing drama, not cheering you up. So Kit's written to randomly accuse Eggman and Sonic of being the same way, and only wanting to use them, so that it could prove his way's right, even though there's no proof that Sonic doesn't care about him. So he says he'll bury them all here, because melodrama. He's such a confusing character. Why try to make him so sympathetic at the start of the arc then? These writers have no idea what to do with him, because he's sympathetic when he's with Surge, but otherwise he's like this. I assume he doesn't really value his own life because he doesn't seem to care that Tails saved him at all. So he flies away carrying her, as I'm just frustrated at the arc still not being over yet. I like that Eggman calls this out as melodramatic histrionics. But if the writer knows this, maybe she should have toned it down a little, instead of writing something that only comes off like bad fanfiction would do it. Because first he was perfectly fine with deciding not to hurt Tails with his water tentacles, which he didn't have to decide not to do. And then he decides to bury him? What Kit did is really stupid of him, and here's why. If he goes on to tell Surge he buried Sonic, she'll be furious because she wants to be the one to kill Sonic, and now she's left without a purpose, and with no way to die or get her old life back. It's obvious she could just Google missing people in the area on someone's computer, like in a library, effortlessly. But she and Kit were too focused on Sonic to think of that. I know he's trying to help her, but why wouldn't he realize she wouldn't appreciate him kill-stealing on her? What's she gonna do to him after he tells her this happened? He wouldn't not tell her, because he'd be obligated to tell her what happened after she passed out. And he'd think lying to her would be disloyal. That's why I say he's doing something dumb, that he could have easily not decided to do. For all he knows, he's just guaranteeing she'll kill him for kill-stealing at worst, and at least get a traumatic experience with her beating him up, and then have a worse time dealing with his life because he'd still want to support her. If he knew this, he's being shockingly self-sacrificial. But you'd think he'd know that a part of loyalty is humoring her, and helping her can still be called disloyal if he's knowingly doing something she'd be mad about. Starline learned that with Eggman. For Surge to not get mad at him for burying Sonic on her, the writing would have to be surprisingly convenient for this comic, by having her stop being mad the second he'd be scared of her, and this is the same girl who threatened to drown him. So he's lucky she'd started being nice to him at all, and now he's left her without a purpose with no way of achieving her dream, as far as she knows anyways. He'd only survive if Starline had the common sense to make him able to heal really fast too, which I didn't think of because he was too stupid to make himself like that, or make them unable to betray him. So my opinion of his intelligence was too lowered for me to take that for granted, because it wasn't established. And normally when something isn't established in a story, it's not canon, and the writer doesn't expect it to be thought of. Well, even if he'll survive, the point is, you'd think this would ruin his friendship with Surge, because now she's gonna know she can't trust him not to kill steal on her. And that's not even mentioning the fact that making himself look bad in front of Sonic is a mistake. Because realistically, he would eventually get ashamed of that. Which makes me feel bad for any future version of him who would feel like that. Eventually they managed to escape from the falling rocks. There was no tension there. I knew they'd survive, so I couldn't care about what was happening. Best case scenario, Kid only destroyed a small part of his home that he doesn't need. So he was exaggerating when he said he was burying his past, trying too hard to be dramatic. If he destroyed too much of the base, that'd be really stupid too, because where else is he supposed to get his food and water? And where else is he supposed to sleep comfortably? Where does he expect to take Surge now? And they've been so stupid that I just naturally assume that they're not smart enough to figure out, go to the police station and you'll find your photos. Eggman humanizes himself saying he wants a snack and a hot bath. Sonic decides to just go home because he needs to get the Wisps back. Ugh, that's the end of the story? Can't the arc just be resolved already? There's already a machine on this planet that cures amnesia. This arc would have you forget that. I guess none of them know exactly where it is to tell them about it. Won't someone assume that it was in the place where Belle was held against her will? What are the chances Starline has 3 bases? The only new thing Surge did in the story was swing around Metal Sonic, so she never shocked Sonic before. She might as well not have, because he could move after that. It's just repetitive to have her fight him over and over. This kind of arc fatigue is why I don't release a new video of this with every issue. There's never enough progress in the arc for me to feel satisfied with the meager amount of issues to talk about. When from the very beginning, all I really want to see is the end. That's not a good story arc. I think a good story arc is one where you enjoy it the whole time. I mean, she could have easily not gotten a hold of Wisps. So while it pretends that the arc had progress because they got the Wisps back, that could have easily not happened. They're basically back to square one. How did Eggman even fix Metal Sonic anyways? He had no way to do it that fast. It's already bad enough Sonic was written to survive something he wouldn't with no real consequences, with the writer being too lazy to explain that he had rings. And Kid completely changed his personalities depending on who he's talking to. How can I trust this comic and be eager to review it when it's full of sloppy writing from a writer that clearly doesn't care? With stuff like these two things piling up, it's obvious there's no thought put into it. It's just have them fight in watery place. The end. The tone is relentlessly depressing. We know Sonic can use Wisps. So it doesn't take any talent to come up with evil Sonic using Wisps. What next? Is she gonna turn into the Werehog? There's no creativity in those fights. Sonic fighting an evil Sonic was done to death. So I don't see the appeal in having more than 2 of those fights. Because I can't take it seriously. I wish I would have her do everything she never did before in just one last fight with Sonic. This is just a dumbed down version of the Scourge arc in Archie because there's way less characters in the arc, and it's just about the evil twin fighting Sonic. And the only substance is Hope Spots disappointing us. Those are what ultimately make me hate this. If it was just Surge, it'd just be a mediocre rehash arc, but not overly tragic and confusing. The arc's annoying because the whole arc just has me waiting for Kid to be Rin to get his memories back and stop being someone he's not. Shadow got his memories back without needing a machine, and Starline said they needed to erase old memories of theirs whenever they came back, so he has to constantly edit. So why doesn't that happen? And Surge being repetitive and creatively starved doesn't help with the arc fatigue either. The only time I saw anything new is when she swung Metal Sonic around. Wow, that was totally worth an entire issue to get some Wisps back. Why couldn't he have been Rin to get them back in the previous fight? I'm so tired of them always escaping. This is like Mecha Sally escaping every time. It's not like you have no idea what's gonna happen next fight every time. So it's not an arc that's creative enough to justify stretching out. This issue by Evan Stanley was about Tails and Eggman reaching Surge's base, because Tails can apparently get some readings and track down the place. Either because he tracked down the Wisp hat, or because Belle connected with Metal Sonic earlier and they're still linked. And Eggman was smart enough to have a way to track down the Dynamo Cage, even though he had no reason to expect it to get stolen. because it was in his private property. And Sonic wouldn't steal it, he would just smash it. So really, he wouldn't even be here and waste a whole issue. As usual, Surge has no reason to constantly stay still around Eggman instead of punching him repeatedly. Why can't she land even one punch? I thought it'd finally get to the fight, but the pacing was too slow to get to the interesting part. As Metal Sonic wastes Sonic's time, I guess being faster than him, so we can't ignore him. And Sonic and Eggman meet up and talk about a truce, and Surge flees just because she's not with Kit, even though she could electrocute them all to death in one touch each, in just a few seconds. So they make a truce and take their time having the predictable reactions to the base. I sure hope the fact that Eggman can't use cheat codes for this base means that he won't be able to steal the technology that made Surge. But it wouldn't be so bad, because it would take forever for him to make entire armies of people with Surge's powers. So he'd only be able to make like a few people at a time. That's nothing compared to what he was in Archie anyways. Still, I don't like the idea of him finding this technology. If Starline was smart, he would have sent a drone to collect the metal virus that he tamed and brought it from this base to the other one he used. Like as soon as he got home. Here's why I don't make a video right after every issue gets released. I've got to get through over 4 issues of this comic just to get a satisfying story, because the plots have barely anything to them and waste comic space filling up an issue and insist on being stories in an arc rather than a full story. This story by Evan Stanley is about Surge fighting Sonic, him surviving being shocked in the water with no explanation, and then in fitting with the sloppy writing, Kitsunami randomly accuses Sonic of not caring about them and just wanting to use them, with no evidence, as if he got total amnesia of the fact that he was nicer to him than Surge the whole time they were alone together, despite the fact that he was his former enemy. I prefer believable characters that actually take in the information they're given. He never should have been meant to be alone with him if he was going to learn nothing from it and never look back on it. It comes out of nowhere that he thinks it's about Sonic because Tails was clearly showing him compassion the whole story and he chose not to keep fighting him. Why would he choose not to keep fighting him if he doesn't value Tails' life? All of a sudden he tries to bury him with Sonic. How is that necessary to write? What took him so long? I guess he thinks they're pretending to be nice because he's used to associates who seem evil but eventually warm up to him. Well, they're the opposite, so it confuses him. But what's really confusing me, since they're doing nothing to justify this paranoia of them. We never saw Starline tell him that they'd only want to use him.